Hi, my name is Paul Seligson and I'm delighted to be here with you. Sadly, I'm in Brighton, England, while all of you are in wonderful Latin America. How I wish I was there with you. Nevertheless, let's get on with the talk. My talk is entitled, Are We Holding Back Latino Learners? And obviously, I believe that we are, and I hope by the end of this talk that you share that belief. Just to begin with, we're going to have two quick activities. First one, can you think of two items of clothing beginning with the same letter in English and your own language? Throughout this presentation on the screen, you'll see L1, by which I mean your own or your first language. In your case, I imagine it's Spanish or Portuguese, but much of what I'm going to say applies to any Romance language. Okay, so for example, you might say bikini, and if you look at the images there of famous Latinos, you'll get lots of ideas. I'll come back to that one. That's the first task. The second task, what is your policy on use of first language when teaching Latinos in our typical monolingual classes right across Latin America? What I invite you to do is to try and make a note of it, because it's very healthy, I think, to, in a nutshell, reduce yourself down. What is your policy? Is it last resort? Is it as and when? Is it all the time? Whatever you think. And in about 10 minutes time, I'll share my policy with you. Perhaps you could write it down, and then at the end of the session, when we have time for questions, we could look at some options in the chat box. Okay, so that's two activities for you to be getting on with. I'll get on with the talk. Let's begin with where we are now. The learning goal for our students, and globally I think now, is no longer, thankfully, near native competence, which is largely unrealistic in most cases, but instead to become an effective, interactive communicator in internationally intelligible English as a lingua franca. I think you would agree with that. Second point is, I don't think it's controversial, but it's my belief, Romance language speakers should achieve this faster, I would say much faster than most other learners, because of the rich common ground between Portuguese and Spanish and English. So let's have a look at what that common ground is. Spanish and Portuguese are two of the 10 closest languages to English. So obviously, if they are your own language, your first language, you're in a much better position than somebody with a far more exotic first language, because of they're so much closer. 58% of English comes from Latin, just like Spanish and Portuguese. So you've got a huge lexical advantage. 1 in 3, 1,000 of the 3,000 most common words are cognates. If you don't believe me, you can actually count them. Honestly, I have, and it comes out approximately 1 in 3 of the most common words are cognates. And fewer than 6% of cognates are false. For years, we've been obsessed with false cognates. If you Google cognate, even Google itself is obsessed with false cognates. The first thing which comes up most of the time is false cognates, which is a tiny proportion of the cognates. 94% of cognates are true friends, and we should celebrate them and not worry anything like as much about the 6% of cognates which are false. It's actually fewer than that. When you look in context, you can often guess what they might mean if you're unsure. So really, it's a very small fraction. 94% we should be celebrating. It's relatively easy for our students to accelerate their vocabulary acquisition because so much of it is familiar and recognizable, as compared to a Russian student, a Chinese student, for example, a Turkish student, who have far greater difficulty in acquiring many of the words which are, for our students, basically a Merry Christmas, a present. Which should lead to greater fluency earlier, I would say much earlier. And of course, from fluency, you develop confidence. The key to fluency often is vocabulary anyway, and our students have this huge lexical advantage. And of course, most English sounds exist in our students' mother tongues, There are many grammatical similarities. Sure, there are more differences than similarities, but there's still a lot of grammatical similarities as compared, for example, to Indonesian or to Arabic or to the more exotic languages. So our students should, if language learning were a race, be at the front of the race rather than perhaps in the middle or at the back. However, by failing to exploit these significant advantages, I would argue that we're delaying and we're diminishing their communicative potential. And that, unfortunately, has been the case in my decades of traveling around Latin America. The students are not at the front of the race. They're not learning more quickly than other students. If anything, they're sort of on a par and sometimes behind, because the methods that we've been using don't play to these significant advantages. We've moved on, thankfully, too, from monolingual teaching. I mean, the idea of only English, through English, I have a gun, if you speak the mother tongue, I will shoot type of thing, is frankly absurd if you think about it, because you can't switch off the mother tongue. It's permanently there. And so students are forever moving between languages. Language teaching, as Woodison said, has always been a bilingual process. And now globally, thankfully, there's a huge acceptance that it's a bilingual process, and translanguaging is very much accepted, and it's run of the mill now, in fact. By translanguaging, we mean using all one's language resources to achieve communicative, sometimes it's difficult to say that, communicative goals. Okay, so bringing in Spanish, Portuguese, and everything you might know from other languages, as well as the English that you've got, to get your meaning across. My favorite definition is this by Garcia and Li Wei. It's going beyond our standard separation of languages and working things out with, between, and through the two languages. In other words, L1-based second language learning. And that's really what I'm going to be promoting throughout this talk. Our teaching should be Spanish or Portuguese-based English learning. Rather than simply giving a general international type approach, we should, I think, tailor and be much more specific to our students' starting point, which is their first language. This is pretty obvious, isn't it? Latinos can express so much more from day one if, and it's a big if we choose the right language. Let me give you an example. I like to do this on day one with my students, right at the beginning, rather than just drilling through the verb to be, what's your name, where are you from, etc., which we have to do, of course. A lot of students overdo this. I think we can jump in with something a bit more interesting, sharing opinions. So I put on the board, I think Bad Bunny, he, Fernando Torres, she, artificial intelligence, it, and empanadas, they, is or are, plus adjective. And then I give my students 14 adjectives in two groups. They're positive and negative. And I say, okay, share your opinions. And they can say, what's your opinion of Bad Bunny? I think he's fantastic. I think he's marvelous. I think he's horrible. I think he's whatever. Okay, and they can start to distinguish each other and can learn about each other through English from day one. Obviously, they may say, horrible, horrible. But when you show them the stress, as I have there in blue, the students, through practice, can quickly move the stress to the right place, reduce the E, and emphasize the ho. They may have problems with the H, of course, but through practice, at least they will be intelligible and soon quite good, and hopefully in the end, very good at pronouncing these words. It's through practice that we improve pronunciation. And my argument is, throughout our teaching, to develop fluency earlier, we should be adding easy confidence-building cognates pretty much whenever they go, the students could say this, they could say this, they could say that. Why not just throw it in, put it on the board, perhaps mark the stress, and make it available to the students? What's the problem behind the current method? The problem, it's too international, it's too generalized, it's one size fits all. And every student is different, every learner is different. A lot of the methods and materials that we're using are based on sort of research of frequency, learner dictionaries and Common European Framework-based international course books, most of which suggest that only 2 of these words should be taught at A1. So, a quick question for you. Which of the 14 adjectives that you can see are the two easiest, which are the two A1 adjectives. This is according to the Cambridge Learner Dictionary, for example. And I suspect you'll find it quite difficult to choose which are the easiest, because they're all easy for our students. I'd love to know what you're saying, but anyway, the answer is important and interesting are allegedly the two which should be taught at A1. Excellent, fantastic, popular, rich, special, horrible, and terrible are the ones which should be included at A2. The others there, marvelous, stupid, and delicious, are B1 according to these classifications, which I find slightly offensive because I've eaten the best meals of my life in Latin America, but I can't say delicious until B1. That does seem a little absurd. And then, worst of all, ridiculous is supposed to be B2 according to these classifications. Now, clearly, they're not saying don't teach these words, but other words are given priority over these words according to this calculation, this measurement. And to my mind, that you're excluding what is so relatively easy and accessible for our students, and it doesn't really work in their best interests. In fact, I find this slightly ridiculous. And what's interesting is if you look through the different classifications from the different publishers, the different dictionaries and so on, they don't even agree which these words are. But you do get examples. A friend of mine has just been producing materials for an A2 course book. And he was strictly told by the publisher, you can only use A2 words from our corpora, which meant if the corpora was as on the screen there, he wouldn't be allowed to say delicious in the first two, in an A2 course book. He wouldn't be allowed to say horrible or terrible. It's ridiculous. L1 is not an obstacle, certainly not in our case when our languages are so close to English, but it's a resource, an asset, because we're so close. And we must remember the power of positive transfer. It's so motivating to suddenly be liberated and start being able to use a lot more language than you see on the pages of a book or materials. And if by not doing this, as many of us still do following these internationalist routes, we diminish our students' learning potential. They're not at the front of the race, they're sort of pushed back rather than emerging as front runners. So that's something you can do pretty easily. Own language is the greatest pedagogical resource. Nobody would dispute that. It lays the foundations for all other languages which we might want to learn. For Butzkemen and Caldwell, it's a language acquisition support system. I like thinking of that, a language acquisition support system. It's a wonderful thing to tell your students. Spanish and Portuguese are supporting your learning. And their argument goes on, a structured and principled deployment of the student's own language, as opposed to the chaotic way it tends to appear despite restrictions in monolingual teaching. We've all used Spanish, we've all used Portuguese. You know, sometimes we feel guilty about it, but it's not really principled, it's not organized, it's rarely systematic, and I think it should be. So a structured and principled deployment can increase rather than decrease the use of the new language for communication. So by structuring and principling our use of L1, we can, I think, accelerate our students' learning. Is that explicit throughout your teaching and your training? Do your students have a clear idea of this? Do your colleagues talk about this as a positive thing, or do we see Spanish and Portuguese still as more of a problem than a potential solution?